Trump is still liable for everything he did. President Trump is still liable for everything he did while he was in office as an ordinary citizen. Unless the statute of limitations is run, still liable for everything he did while he was in office. Didn't get away with anything yet. We have a criminal justice system in this country. We have civil litigation. And former presidents are not immune from being accountable by either one.
No one's above the law in the United States. That's a foundational principle that I've talked about, coming from Federalist 69, coming from the structure of the Constitution. We're all equal before the law in the United States of America. The foundation of our Constitution was that, as Hamilton explained in Federalist 69, the presidency would not be a monarchy, and it specified all the ways that under the Constitution the president is not above the law. No one is above the law.
I believe that no one is above the law under our system, and that includes the president. The president is fully bound by the law, the Constitution, and statutes.
At the same time, if they knew this was going to be complicated, they knew it had to be remanded to the lower court. Why was it one of the last cases that were put out? Why didn't they dispatch this quickly? Why was this at the very end? This is very frightening, because all you have to see is, Donald Trump's claim that this is a complete exoneration of what we knew happened on January 6th. And let me say another thing. So the president telling the attorney general, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. If the attorney general doesn't do it, the president can fire him to bring somebody else in and not be held accountable. Is that the kind of country we want to live in? And I think we don't recognize the consequences of that quite yet.
Yeah.
Welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known, the Supreme Court ruling. And you even saw in that clip Justice John Roberts years ago contradicted himself today with his ruling. In fact, John Roberts made one of the most frightening of all statements during his decision yesterday. But folks are really freaking out, as they say, and understandably so. Donald Trump has already filed a motion to have his New York conviction thrown out ahead of his July 11th sentencing, and there's no reason to believe that it won't happen, but perhaps for other reasons. Democrats, meanwhile, continue to play a game of self-ruination, with reportedly more wanting to replace President Biden, who, despite a forceful press conference last night in the wake of the Supreme Court's democracy ending decision, talked about the ruling as if it only applies to Trump or a Trump presidency. That's a problem. I keep hearing Democrats apply it to simply a Trump presidency. And I'll tell you why, because it applies to Biden as well, because of his refusal, because of Joe Manchin's refusal, because of Kirsten Sinema's refusal to get rid of the filibuster or go around the filibuster when they had the numbers in both the House and the Senate. They failed miserably. Getting rid of it and expanding the court was the one move that the Association for the Blind could see made all the sense in the world. And just as Democrats stood by and watched Mitch McConnell steal a Supreme Court seat from Barack Obama, and just as Democrats stood by and watched as Ruth Bader Ginsburg was dying in her seat on the Supreme Court and did nothing to move her out, and just as they stood by and watched the MAGA puppet Donald Trump put 3 corrupt and unfit judges on the bench, Biden and the Democrats are only going to try and talk a good game. Folks, it's no longer about saving democracy, for democracy is as dead as the civil rights movement. Joining us this morning is Gregory L. Germain, a professor of law at Syracuse University. Professor, thanks for joining Let It Be Known.
Glad to be here.
Well, the Supreme Court raised the bar for prosecuting Donald Trump or any president. I want to start, though, with the decision itself. Of course, you obviously read the rulings from both sides, the 6 justices for and the 3 that dissented. Your overall take, Professor, on this ruling?
Well, I think the court went far beyond what they needed to do. They had I think the court had very legitimate concerns here about the potential for politicizing prosecutions of former presidents. And when they initially took the case, I was comfortable with the idea that we need to have some rules about how presidents in their normal kind of day-to-day activities are immune from prosecution for official acts. The problem is it became a very political decision where they went far beyond what they needed to do in kind of carving out the different categories of when a president can be held responsible. So the court said for kind of core constitutional acts that are given to the power of the president under the Constitution, he's absolutely immune, and the evidence of those acts cannot be used even in connection with other crimes, and that gives us the potential problem where the most corrupt acts, selling pardons to the highest bidder, absolute immunity, and all communications with members of the executive branch, talking to the military generals about, we should do a coup because I lost the election. That would be absolutely immune according to this decision. And so I just don't see, and the idea that the motive of the president should be irrelevant to determining whether it's an official act or an unofficial act, this just seems wrong to me. So I just think they went way beyond what they needed to do to deal with legitimate concern, and created the possibility that a president could really abuse what we all think are the basic norms of the American system.
Well, that's exactly, Professor, what is being alleged with 93 felony counts. Most of them allege that most of those counts, those criminal charges against Donald Trump, alleges he did just that. It sets a precedent. So let me ask you this. I saw some quotes about Richard Nixon. So based on what this court ruled, how would that, if this ruling happened in 1973. How would that have affected Richard Nixon?
Well, it's a very interesting question because the Supreme Court in the Nixon Watergate case held that Nixon had to produce the tapes that he made of his conversations with other executive branch members in connection with the prosecution of charges against his subordinates. And so there was no immunity. Nixon could not assert immunity from producing his records. And now the court says, well, any communications that an executive has with his subordinates is absolutely privileged and cannot be used as evidence. And so it's very hard to square that ruling with the Watergate decision. Now, maybe I'm missing something, and maybe there's some way that they can square it because that wasn't a prosecution against the president. So maybe they can use it as evidence against other people and not the president or something like that. But it just seems contrary to the Nixon opinion. And of course, we never got to the point where Nixon was charged with a crime because he was pardoned by President Ford. And so, we don't have any precedent. No president has ever been criminally charged before. And so this is a novel case. And as I've said, I'm very sympathetic to the idea that we've got to have strict limits on on the prosecution of presidents. Otherwise, every time we have a change of administration, there are going to be indictments against the former president. I mean, the political ramifications are very serious. The court is addressing a very serious thing, but they just threw the baby out with the bathwater here by, saying that there are absolutely no limits on immunity.
I'm sorry, Professor, as you articulated, things like bribery, treason, and even murder. And we bring up murder because during the arguments before the Supreme Court, Donald Trump's lawyers said that hypothetically he could have SEAL Team 6 eliminate a political rival. And Justice John Roberts, the Chief Justice, said that he would hope that SEAL Team 6 would decline such a request. You want to explain that?
Well, I would hope so too, and we have a long tradition of, the military not, going along with anything that they're told to do. On the other hand, this hypothetical was brought up in the DC Circuit. That's where it originally came up. One of the judges on the DC Circuit said, "What about this hypothetical?" And the Trump team said, "Well, because it's an official act, any communication with an executive officer, it's immune." And everybody was horrified by that. Well, now the Supreme Court has affirmed that. And so I don't think there's any doubt about it. It would be an immune act. Now, hopefully, no one will ever do that. But to permit something that to not address these potential risks to the democracy as part of this, to not have some potential out for the most outrageous conduct. Is very, very troubling to me.
So in the opening, Professor, I said that the ruling effectively, we keep hearing, you got to save democracy, you got to save democracy. I think the ruling effectively puts an end to democracy in the sense because you hear the dissent, you hear Justice Sotomayor say, well, he's a king now. The president is now a king. Ketanji Brown Jackson, the same thing. The president is now a king. I see many of our viewers writing in things like Power 96 says, long live the king in the U.S. Mike V mentions that king. um, this idea of democracy as we know it, Professor, I mean, how do you see it? Because it seems to me that this ruling seals the fate of democracy.
Well, there's a few protections left. I mean, one is impeachment, which is, as we know, has been tried a number of times and has never succeeded. You know, I guess for the most heinous of acts, a president could certainly be impeached. And so if somebody, you know, asked the military to kill their political opponent and it came out, you know, maybe the
Maybe.
president's party would seek impeachment or go along
No.
with impeachment. I don't know,
Yeah.
and we have very strong norms in this country about what is acceptable behavior, and so it's not all lost.
Well,
If
we can debate about those norms,
well, they're being
Professor, all
challenged,
day.
aren't they? I mean, they're
Yeah.
certainly being tested, and
Yeah.
and to some extent, I think Trump's like a little kid who pushes the limit, you know, and you know, at some point you gotta say no, you can't do that, and so it is a troubling situation, but you know, there's no immunity for unofficial acts. So if he goes outside, if he goes and consults with somebody who's not one of his not an executive office employee, well, then maybe he can be prosecuted for it. And so we got a lot of vague language about, you know, what is a non-core official act. We don't know what happens with non-core official acts. We don't know. What is an unofficial act? We don't know. And so they left open you know, some and many of these acts may, you know, the court said that some of the allegations in the complaint are unofficial acts for which he can be prosecuted. So they didn't throw out the whole case. But they, you know, they sent a mess. I mean, they sent a big mess back to the trial court to figure out what to do, because
So
they didn't define anything except this idea of core acts. And with respect to core acts, they gave such broad, unlimited immunity that you know, we have potentially scary scenarios.
Well, with them sending it back, Judge Chutkan will now have that in her lap. And here's the interesting thing about that. Uh, We know that we will not have a trial this year, if at all. But what we will have is a sort of we will have a trial of sorts in that Jack Smith is going to have to produce all of his evidence. Is that a good thing? Could that be a good thing, I should say? Because this will probably happen around September. They will convene in DC. He will probably have to call all of his witnesses, including the former Vice President Mike Pence, including law enforcement and others, including other officials from the Trump administration. He's going to have to play out what he would have done in trial. If he has a decent case or a good case, could this effectively work against Donald Trump, even though he won't be prosecuted?
So the way they worded this opinion, the trial court has to hold a preliminary determination of what claims get dismissed and what claims go forward. And it's going to require a great deal of detailed analysis. And Amy Coney Barrett took the position that Trump should have an absolute right to appeal that decision, which we call an interlocutory appeal, because it's not a final decision on the case, to appeal that decision all the way up to the Supreme Court. And they reserved the power to second guess whatever is done in DC by not defining this non-core kind of presumptive official act doctrine. And so I just don't see how this case gets to trial before the election. I just don't think it's going to happen. They may try.
Hmm.
But I don't think they're going to get this case to trial. I think the Pence prosecution is probably going to get thrown out. The prosecution based on his communications with the Attorney General and trying to threaten and coerce the Attorney General to do things that the Attorney General was unwilling to do. I think that's clearly that the court said that needs to be thrown out because he's absolutely immune for any communications with the executive branch employees. And with respect to Pence, they left open the possibility that that is not a core matter because the president has nothing to do with the vice president's activities in connection with certifying the election. But they said, but maybe it is related to advancing the president's agenda and so should be thrown out. And so I think that's very, very questionable whether any of the Pence material is still going to be in the case. And so what's left is the communications with, state actors and things like that, where he's going to try to make the argument that he's got some presumptive immunity, they call it, some presumptive immunity, because he believed he was protecting the integrity of the election.
Yes.
And we don't know, is he absolutely immune from all official acts or only these core acts? How does this presumptive immunity apply? How do you rebut the presumption? None of that was decided. So the trial court's going to have to figure all of that out, and then Trump's going to appeal it and before the case can go to trial. And so
Yes.
I just don't see this happening before the election.
Yeah, and obviously it's not going to happen. As I said, from what I understand, the time frame for such a hearing will probably be in September. It'll probably take anywhere from 6 weeks to 8 weeks, and that takes you into the election. And as you eloquently stated, it will be appealed one way or the other, and it will have to make its way back up to the Supreme Court. We're talking about something that's just not going to happen within the next year, let alone next few months. So
right. I'm sure there won't be any kind of final decisions on any of these cases before the election. They may get to trial on one of the cases. Maybe the documents case. I guess it's possible, but they've really been mired up with a Trump-appointed judge in Florida. So
there's no way Eileen Cannon's going to let that go to trial before the election. I just can't see that at all.
I think you're probably right. And then if Trump wins the election, can he self-pardon himself? They've said that pardon power is absolute immunity and cannot be questioned by any other branch. A self-pardon? I think most of us thought, no, a self-pardon has such a strong conflict of interest that it couldn't be granted. Well, I think the Supreme Court has said absolute immunity.
Listen, I've been saying on this program, Professor, for a long time, stop saying what they can't do because they continue to prove otherwise. And as you just said, this idea of a self-pardon, yes, if it has to do with this court and this particular former president, perhaps future president Donald Trump, it can happen if they wanted to happen. They've proven that. But let me ask you this though, and I believe this was David Youngblood who asked this, and I've been saying this since last night because I watched Biden's press conference, and one of the things that struck me was this: can Biden legally, as David Youngblood writes, can Biden now legally disband the Congress or arrest them or attack or have SEAL Team 6 attack its political rival?
Well, I don't think the president can can do away with Congress. That's not within his core functions.
Right.
But could he pardon himself? Could he sell pardons? Could he have communications with the military to prevent Donald Trump from taking office? The court has said all of that is permissible because it's within the core functions of the president. And they made it very clear that this is not a provision that only applies to Donald Trump. It applies to any president forever in the future. And so,
well, in
Joe
the future
Biden,
and right now, right?
And right now, yeah. And so Joe Biden is entitled to the same benefits that Donald Trump is entitled to under this opinion. So, you know, is he going to do that? No.
No, he's not going to do that.
But could he? Yeah. And that's why, I mean, we have all these, we have immunity, we have attorney-client privileges, but we say, anything you discuss with your attorney is privileged unless it's to commit a fraud or crime, unless you're conspiring with your attorney to commit a crime. So we have limitations on privileges. But to say, there's absolutely no limitation, no matter how corrupt the activity is, whatever the motive is irrelevant as long as it's within his Article 2 powers. It cannot be questioned. It cannot be used as evidence. It just goes, I think they went too far and they didn't need to do it.
Well, here's the other part of that too. You said something just now about the elections. Suppose the president, well, right now it's Biden. Suppose he says, and Trump has made threats about the election. If he loses the election, there will be chaos and anarchy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Suppose the president says, well, wait a minute. We cannot hold this election because of threats of extreme violence. We are canceling the election. It appears, and correct me if I'm wrong, Professor, it appears that would be under the scope of what the Supreme Court granted yesterday.
I don't know. I mean, it's not a core presidential power to postpone the election. Okay. So there's nothing in the Constitution in Article 2 like there is with a pardon power or foreign affairs or the relation with the appointees to office. So that would be a different thing. And I could see the court saying no, the president can't postpone the election. Whether he would be immune from prosecution for trying to do it, well, that maybe he would be immune from prosecution for trying to do it. But could he do it? No, I don't think he could I don't think he could postpone the election.
Okay. How about this one? Professor Austin Cooper raises this question: if Biden loses, he's immune from vacating the White House next January 20th. His official duties require him to remain as president.
I don't understand it.
Well, I think what Austin's trying to say is if he determines that his official duties require him to remain beyond January 20th, would he be inoculated? Will he be able to remain in the Oval Office?
Okay, so none of this says that he can remain in the office. It says he can't be criminally prosecuted for it. Okay. So if let's say Biden says this was a rigged election, I think I really won. I got the majority of the vote, even though I didn't win in the Electoral College or something. I want to stay in office, and so I'm not leaving. I don't think the Supreme Court would have any problem to say you lost the election and send the marshals in to remove him. But he couldn't be. But I think he couldn't be prosecuted criminally for his acts if he could make this, argument that it was part of his, that he's absolutely immune. And so the only thing this covers is criminal prosecution. It doesn't cover whether the acts are going to be validated by the court. And so I have no doubt that the court would say, no, you lost the election and, get out of the White House. But could they bring a criminal prosecution for it? No, and I think even conspiring with the military to have a coup to prevent the peaceful transfer of power cannot result, according to this decision, in criminal prosecution. And so it takes some of the disincentive for engaging in the most outrageous conduct.
Well, as Greer points out too, she says that Trump has powers that Trump says he has, but everyone else ponders what they can and cannot do. Trump believes he can do whatever he wants.
I mean that there is some truth to that. I don't know what the limits are in Trump's mind of what he's authorized to do, but that doesn't mean he really is authorized to do it. And so that's why the court, I think, says some of these acts that have been charged are clearly not public acts, are not official acts, and are not entitled to any immunity. And as you mentioned, that Trump's trying to dismiss the New York prosecution based on this decision, and I don't see how anybody's going to say that conspiring with your lawyer to cover up a hush money payment and falsifying records, I don't see how anybody's going to say those are official presidential acts. So that seems like a complete loser to me. He's welcome to make the argument, but I don't think anybody's going to buy that, and I don't think the Supreme Court would buy that. Those are clearly private acts that are done. He is a president when he cut the checks or made the business entries, but they weren't presidential acts. They concerned his private business, and so I don't think there's any legitimate argument that those are that he's immune from prosecution for that. Whether he committed a crime, I think, is a much more difficult and subtle question that the courts are going to have to address on appeal.
The court last week kind of signaled that they were going to do something like this when they ruled on the obstruction case. That itself seems to, like I said, be a precursor to this. When you heard that ruling, Professor, what was your thoughts on that? Because it potentially affects a lot of the cases from the January 6th prosecution, but certainly it does have the potential to have an impact on Trump's charges as well.
Well, I agreed with Amy Coney Barrett in that case. I mean, these two opinions were the two opinions that, I mean, we've had a whole slew of opinions come out by the Supreme Court, and I was very comfortable with all of them except these two. And so I read that statute, which basically has two sections in it. Section 1 deals with corrupting records before an official proceeding, and Section 2 deals with other corrupt conduct before an official proceeding. And the court read the records provision into the second part of the statute and said, no, that particular criminal law only applies to records violations. And I just can't read the statute that way. And, Amy Coney Barrett, a Trump appointee, can't read it that way either. So it's, in some ways, that was less of a political division than this case. But it was I just, as a matter of statutory interpretation, I just didn't see it. Now, that's obviously not a constitutional decision. The Congress can change the law and clarify that issue, but I thought it was an incorrect decision. It does not threaten democracy in the same way that this kind of overbroad reading of presidential immunity does.
Yeah, and speaking of democracy, we obviously are focused on the presidency, but the Supreme Court itself, they, Professor, are pretty much above the law. They are above any type of reach. The Congress, the Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says she's filing articles of impeachment against some of the justices, John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito. she's not going to have the votes. Number one, we know
That's for
that.
sure.
We know
That's
that.
for sure.
But
And you know, the Constitution requires high crimes and misdemeanors before an impeachment of a Supreme Court justice.
but how?
But you know that if you had the political votes, I mean, you know, if you had the political votes to do it, you know that it is a vote. It is a vote in a political branch. It's not a judicial trial, and so you know they could say, "I think it was a high crime and misdemeanor," and you know, and impeach and remove someone from federal office for political reasons. I think that's a terrible idea to do that. I don't think it's going to succeed. I think there's, you know, no votes for. I mean, you know, they get 10 votes in the Senate, maybe. I mean, I don't know, but it's not realistic.
Well, and again, Professor, I guess there's no way around what Greer is saying here, that the court made the decision yesterday that, in fact, Donald Trump is above the law. Most people believe that the Supreme Court is corrupt. We saw the ethics, we could say violations, but they have no true code of ethics, so there's nothing to violate. But we've seen these justices like Clarence Thomas, like Samuel Alito, take gifts. Of course, Thomas has been the most egregious, and still sit in on the cases from which he, Harlan Crow, for instance, and others that have given him gifts. Well, he sat in on their cases. He weighed in on them. He ruled on them. That suggests corruption, right?
Well, okay, so you raised a couple of issues, and I want to take them separately. So, is the president above the law? The court has said for core official acts, the president is above the law and can't be criminally prosecuted. And it's the first time that they've ever said that. And I agree that for, you know, non-corrupt core official acts, probably we should have a rule that the president can't be corrupted and can't be prosecuted as above the law. But for corrupt acts, I don't agree. So in some ways, the president is above the law under this opinion, but in a lot of ways he isn't. He's still subject to criminal prosecution for unofficial act, and maybe he's subject to criminal prosecution for non-core official acts. So there's still some area in which he can be held accountable. How far does this go? We really don't know. And so I'm, you know, I guess I don't think Clarence Thomas has sat in on any decisions involving his friend Harlan Crow. I don't think that's true. What?
According to ProPublica, he has.
Well, I don't know. I'm not. If they say he has, I'm not aware of it. You know, is it corrupt? Personally, I don't think Harlan Crow has to give Clarence Thomas any money to get Clarence Thomas to agree with Harlan Crow's political opinions. I mean, I think Clarence Thomas agrees with Harlan Crow's political opinions, and so, you know, is there corruption there? You know, we really have to look at the details to see, you know, if he was making decisions in cases where Harlan Crow really had a stake, and I don't know the answer to that. But I haven't seen it, so you know, and so, you know, I don't know. I think some of these judges should have more actively recused themselves from some cases in which they had a particular interest. But you know, recusal has always been a questionable activity. Should Judge Cannon recuse herself from the Trump case because she was a Trump appointee? That's getting pretty close. And I think some judges would recuse themselves, other judges wouldn't recuse themselves. So all of these recusal questions are, you know, they're all kind of right on the line, and I don't know.
Well, Professor, before we let you go and get to other news topics this morning, let me ask you this. Considering the developments, what predictions can we safely make about the political landscape over the next decade?
Well, I think this is going to cut down on the potential for political prosecutions, which is probably a good thing. Um, whether we're going to see more corrupt activities by the president, given this broad grant of immunity, I think is the concern. And we're going to be relying on norms that were set from the time that George Washington gave up power after his second term, to the astonishment of the world. We have strong political norms in this country, and we, I guess, have to hope that those political norms hold sway over the evil intentions of a future president.
Yeah. Well, Professor Jermaine, Syracuse University, thanks for joining the Black Presses Let It Be Known this morning and helping us to try and break down a little bit further what took place yesterday. We really appreciate you, Professor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. And so Dr. Nicole says, in the end, the biggest threat to the people concerned in presidential immunity primarily comes when and if you elect an immoral criminal to office. You couldn't be more right there, right? So I think that was the message last night from President Biden, that, hey, it's a clear choice, an immoral criminal or someone who is trying to have your back. And so that's where that stands. It's one of those things where they continue to. We talk about Project 2025 so much, but still not enough, because too many people still not are not still aware or not aware of what is Project 2025, what's happening, even though elements have already been implemented before our very eyes. And that's just the bottom line here. So, Professor Germain, Syracuse University, we appreciate them, that's for sure. Politically correct. and I agree. There's no more norms. That was my point. I see Power 96 saying that there are no more norms. I'm 35 at Power 96, a 34-time convicted felon, has no morals, and his norm is breaking the law. And so the Supreme Court said, yes, that's what we are going to allow, because this is our guy. And that's really what it comes at. They wrote their opinions, and reading their opinions, they may as well just simply wrote, this is our guy. And that's that. Save time, save effort. They could have done this months ago. So that's where it's at. Other news this morning: 4 Missouri prison cops were charged Friday with murder, and a fifth with involuntary manslaughter, and the December execution of Othell Moore Jr., who was a 38-year-old at Jefferson City Correctional Center. According to the Kansas City Defender, a Black-owned and award-winning newspaper in that city, the prison cops restrained Othell with a full-body torture contraption, covered him with a hood and a mask, and repeatedly attacked him with chemical weapons. Witnesses reported that Othell was pleading for his life. An eyewitness described the gang-style torture execution causing surge of terror throughout prisons in that state. Jordan Sella, a former prisoner at the facility who was an eyewitness, he actually eyewitnessed this. He says, I never watched anyone die before. The horror began with what was supposed to be a routine cell search on the maximum security block. They came in like 100 deep, and that's barely an exaggeration, Seller told CNN. He says they tried to pull everybody out as fast as they can, search the cells as fast as they can, and get out. The former inmate said that his cellmate had already been pulled out and put back in the cell when they saw the commotion around Othel's cell. The cell was surrounded, he said, by COs, and Othel Moore was begging for his life, saying he had a medical lay in bed and needed 2 pairs of handcuffs to ease the tension on his shoulders. An attorney for Othel's family, a guy named Andrew Stroth, said Moore had blood coming out of his ears and his nose. The way they describe this is just horrible. He says Othel was jumping, hopping, and screaming. And of course, the thought and the sound of him saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." He said it 3 times, according to eyewitnesses. And then he also told them that he was allergic to mace. He says, "I need help." And then, of course, the eyewitness said at that point, it got even worse. Said Odell began shaking, and slowly his screams were getting weaker and weaker. And he said, he said, "I believe I watched him die before they even took him out of the wing." That is an execution. The judge overseeing the trial there has actually said that yes, this is going forward to trial. I should say the judge said that this is going to trial. Really, really sad situation there. Inmates are often treated just as objects, not as humans, and this was the case here. The Kansas City Defender has done a great, great job. We've lifted up a few of their stories, and they continue to shine a light on corruption in that city, everywhere it might be, including in the prisons. And this is a horrible, horrible way for anyone to die. Not sure, they didn't say what Othel Moore Jr. was in prison for, or his time, I should say, how much time he had. But regardless, to treat this guy, to kill him this way, to kill him, period. We know that corrections officers have a tough job, but this, with the criminal charges, shows that this was just this gang mentality, um, and they murdered him for their own self gratification. So hopefully, the prosecutor will do his or her job and make sure that Othel's family gets the justice that they so rightly deserve. Um, Power 96 says those CEOs just might walk. He says, after yesterday, we really don't have a justice system. We have a king, and his court makes the rules. And listen, that's the prevailing thought now, that um, this is a dictatorship, as Trump has said it would be. But it's up to Joe Biden, isn't it? It's up to Joe Biden now, because I know the professor was, again, being politically correct, but this applies to him. This applies to President Biden. And so Biden, his speech last night, he says he dissents. Well, you got to do more than just dissent. It just seems that you have to do more than just dissent. Should I repeat that, Greer? But you have to do. Yeah, he just has to come stronger. They all do. They all do. If they are expected to change things or prevent certain things from going forward, the Supreme Court not only greenlit Donald Trump, but they greenlit Joe Biden as well. And this idea, I keep saying it, this idea of what Michelle Obama introduced some years ago, It's got to be in that game of politics, in that life and death game, that democracy ending ruling yesterday. I don't care what anyone says, and that did end. It ended democracy. It's over. They cannot abide by the when they go low mantra anymore. That has to be, I am you. You go to the dirt. I'm going to go beneath that and find some worms. Has to be. And if they're not willing to do it, then if Biden is not willing to do it, then um, he should step aside. He should step aside. If at this point it's a long shot, but if he's not willing to do it, then maybe Gavin Newsom is willing to do it. Maybe Wes Moore is willing to do it. Maybe Kamala Harris is willing to do it, to get in the mud. Gregory Muhammad, based on that last story, he says that we must put better focus on our incarcerated family. David Youngblood says, "Go amoeba-like." You have to. So when you're dealt a deck of cards, when you're dealt a hand from a deck of cards, that's what you play with. I mean, you guys have played spades or poker or whatever. You have to play with the hand that's dealt. Can't go to the dealer and say, you know what, give me some other cards, some different cards. This is what you have. Power 96 says, tell Joe Biden, don't waste his time as king. Throw Trump in prison for life. It is an official president act. And that's all I'm saying. It's do something, make a statement. See, I think that Biden came off last night. He was forceful, but I think he came off as what they have been accusing him of, which is what the Trump folks with the prosecutions. This is a political prosecution. He came off as angry about this in a way that made you feel uneasy that, yeah, well, maybe he is behind the prosecution. And I know he's not. I know he's not. But with his words, you can come to that conclusion if you are on the fence, or certainly if you're on the other side of him. But they keep talking about for the good of the country and the interest of the country. Well, now's your time, President Joe. Mike V says all of those sitting Democrats who made calls for Biden to step aside should be seen as traitors to the president and the party. Well, as I said, if you're a Democrat who sees the big picture, you're not, you probably feel the same way Mike V feels. But at the same time, the Democrats as a whole has not been able to, and rightfully so, shake the reputation of being too passive, or certainly not, seemingly not knowing how to respond even when stuff is put on a platter to them. And part of that is the fact that it's the old guard still in charge. Let some of these younger guys, I guarantee you, you're not going to kick around a Maxwell Frost. You're not going to kick around an AOC without some serious pushback. Let's take a look at this clip.
As a dictator for 4 years, Biden as the president for 4 more years. What do you pick? Hey, what's up, guys? We are here in front of the United States Supreme Court, and we're going to talk to some people, get their thoughts on today's Supreme Court ruling. I'm here with
David.
All right, David. So Supreme Court today ruled that Donald Trump, or that the president, should have limited immunity. Are you aware of the ruling?
Yes, I am. I watched it.
What's your thoughts on it?
I thought it was exactly on point. I don't feel like that a president acting in something that is not immoral or wrong in any way should be prosecuted for it.
Donald Trump was pressuring Mike Pence to, not certify the election. You feel like that's okay for the president to do?
I think it was in a case where an election was bogus.
Okay. So other than Donald Trump calling it bogus, who else was calling it bogus?
I think if you look at the evidence when you go on and check it out, I mean, there were all these, the mail-in ballots were, when you have sometimes the same Social Security number being used twice, people that were dead casting votes. I mean, there's no way to dispute that there were votes that were cast that were bogus.
The question would be, if there was this much undisputable evidence, why did 64 courts throw out the allegations of fraud?
Well, I'll tell you why, because there were majority were on the left, and they spent 2 years of Trump's presidency trying to prosecute him when they should have spent 2 years of trying to help the American public.
The 64 courts said there's no election fraud. And so you're saying the courts were corrupt in that regard. Now, is the Supreme Court corrupt in this regard now, or?
I don't say the Supreme Court's corrupt in this regard. I think the Supreme Court has a good understanding, even though they all of them didn't agree. All of them didn't agree with this ruling today. That was a majority ruling.
It was 6-3.
Right. It wasn't a majority. I mean, it was a majority ruling, but it wasn't everybody didn't agree with it.
If there was that much evidence, then after January 6th, Donald Trump kind of dropped it and stopped pursuing it. If there's this much evidence, why did Donald Trump and all those people stop pursuing it, stop providing the evidence of a stolen election, a clearly stolen election, as you say?
Because he was wanting to let everybody see how incompetent Joe Biden was and come back in November and take back control and make America what it should be again.
He just gave up and let Joe Biden have the presidency to show America that Joe Biden was incompetent. That's what you're saying?
Well, he gave up because he knew at the time it wasn't going to be any way to pursue it. And then when he saw there was opening to come back and finally put things back where it needed to be, he took it, and you see where it's at.
Capitol building right over there. January 6, 2021. What do you think about the people that broke into it?
I think they were doing what everybody in here has a right to do, and I feel like they didn't do anything that was any more severe than what happened with the BLM movement.
How do you compare the two?
How do I compare the two? You had two groups of people who were pissed off about what went on, and they both did what they felt they needed to do.
Well, one group was protesting in the street against police brutality. The other group, that day, the Capitol building was closed to the public because there was a joint session of Congress. It was a constitutionally protected process to certify the elections, and they broke in, ended that process, and forced Congress to evacuate. How do you compare that to protests in the street from Black Lives Matter?
We conquered a monarchy to take this country, and that's what we're based on. When you feel like there's something going, we have a right to do what we feel like we want to do. And did any of the people on January 6th, did they kill any of those officers?
Officers did die as a result of January 6th, correct.
From injuries, right? But did they shoot any of them?
There's other ways to die without getting shot.
How come there was no prosecution for the police officer that shot that girl?
She should have complied.
Unarmed.
She didn't comply with the officers.
Unarmed, right?
So are you saying if someone doesn't comply with the commands of the officer, they shouldn't be killed? So it sounds like you agree with Black Lives Matter.
Wasn't that the whole thing with Black Lives Matter? So when
so you agree with Black Lives Matter movement then?
What I'm saying is they went and did their thing because they felt like we don't agree with what's going on.
Yeah, but you brought up Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt didn't comply with the officer.
What I'm saying is, so when a group of white people go and do it, oh my God, now they're trying to take over. It's a whole big thing. It's no different. One group spoke out about what they felt like was going wrong. Another group spoke out about what they.
But only one group literally stormed the Capitol. The other group just took to the streets. You said we have a constitutionally protected right. I argue that's the right to protest in the street, not storm the Capitol building.
Well, that was part of a street, and who owns all this?
Sure, we the taxpayers.
That's right. So if you want,
we can't walk in the White House when we want to.
If you want to come up here, you should be able to go up in there.
Anytime you want, even during a closed session?
You should be able to come up in here.
Do you feel the same way about the White House?
I feel like the American public, when something's going on, should have the right to come up here and speak out.
Yes, one question I ask everybody, and I want to ask you this especially. Given the option, Trump as a dictator for 4 years, Biden as the president for 4 more years, what do you pick?
Give me Trump.
Trump as a dictator over Biden as a president?
Biden's a joke.
So you would take Trump as a dictator over Biden as a president?
Yeah, because if that is what the world sees, if that is what the world sees as the person that is most able to run our country, then that's why the world thinks we're a damn laughingstock. I mean, you got Fire Marshal Bill up there running our country.
Yeah, Mike V. No sitting Republicans are asking Trump to step aside with 34 felony convictions. They are perfectly fine with criminal representation, and that's the difference there too. But again, listen, if you're going down that road, I think the road to travel now is what has been presented by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has said the president pretty much. I know people argue with, well, limited immunity, absolute. This is, I think the professor did break it down that this pretty much is absolute immunity. This is pretty much, they're calling it something else, but this is absolute immunity. Judge Sotomayor, Judge Roberts, both on the opposite sides, both called it what it is. Judge Roberts with that, agreeing with that hypothetical that Trump or any president can order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival. Roberts' qualification was only that I hope SEAL Team 6 doesn't take him up on it. Well, if SEAL Team 6 doesn't, then he's going to eliminate whoever in SEAL Team 6 refused the order, right? And Justice Sotomayor said this pretty much the same thing, that, hey, this guy is a king. You're making no more democracy. So that's where it's at. So let's see if they continue. Ilhan Omar, the Supreme Court can no longer be trusted to uphold the Constitution. If Trump is reelected, this convicted felon, rapist, and twice impeached former president will be able to do whatever the hell he wants, is what that representative wrote. That's her words. So, but that's part of the problem right there. The Democrats, she's absolutely right. But forget about tweeting it, putting it on your social media. Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, Kamala Harris, they all need to gather together, be at the White House, go to Rehoboth Beach, wherever, Camp David, and plot out what you can do based on what the Supreme Court just said a president can do, and everybody get in lockstep. Look, that's what I would do. That's exactly what I would do. You play the hand that dealt you, and this is the problem I'm having too. I mean, future president, and you see what this individual writes, but this is the problem I'm having. They keep saying either Trump or future president. That ruling applies to the current president. No, he hasn't broken any laws, but at this point, the statement should be he hasn't broken any laws yet, because it's on. They keep saying how we're all in danger. They keep saying how everything is at stake. No holds barred. Well, make it no holds barred now. The Supreme Court said you can. Yeah, Mike B, that white male interviewed is very dangerous. The Supreme Court has said no holds barred for the president. And what is Project 2025? Yes. Centralizing power, compromising the Department of Justice. Yeah. I mean, it's read it, and read it so that you don't have to weep later. But the judge, and another subject this morning, the judge overseeing the criminal racketeering case against Young Thug recessed the trial indefinitely. Now, this trial's been going on 2 years, but he's recessed it now indefinitely until an outside judge can review motions from the Atlanta rapper and others seeking to recuse the judge from the case because of allegations that he and prosecutors held an improper meeting with a key witness. Fulton County Judge Urel Glanville made the surprise announcement as attorneys gathered for what had been scheduled to be a private hearing to review the transcript of a June 10th meeting between the judge, prosecutors, and a man named Kenneth Copeland and Young Thug in the gang conspiracy case. You might recall when the judge put Young Thug's attorney in jail because the judge was the one doing something improper, apparently, allegedly. And the attorney found out about it. And the attorney had every right to know that someone else had taken responsibility for the crime that his client is being charged with. And the judge decided that that was some big secret and kept it away from the defense, which in itself demands a mistrial. So it's been a wacky, wacky, wacky case. The way it's been handled. I mean, we've heard lyrics in the courtroom. We've seen folks actually dancing in their seats in the courtroom. We've seen Lil Woody testifying. And by the way, y'all better leave Lil Woody alone. Lil Woody said that people be running up on him. They saw his testimony, and he said, "I'm not a nice guy. You better leave me alone." So y'all better leave him alone. So he saw his absolute hilarious testimony, and I just don't get this particular judge. You don't have to be a legal expert to understand that this judge has totally tainted this case, not just with what he did last month with Young Thug's lawyer, but throughout. That this is a case that if that jury would have come back with a guilty verdict, the next day an appeals court would say, "No, we're taking this up. And we are overturning that." Yeah, Power 96, the trial is and has been a mockery of the justice system. He says that is one of the reasons why some of our youth will continue to break the law and kill one another. The trial has been an absolute mockery. I just believe that Saturday Night Live should be having a field day with this particular case. It's got to be a movie or something simply about the trial. He calls Lil Woody a failed product of the public education system. But nonetheless, that trial is now, this 2-year-old trial is now on hold indefinitely. Unbelievable. So much stuff going on, folks. So much stuff going on. Continue to tune in to Let It Be Known. Continue to check your local African-American owned newspapers for your news and information. We see constantly that you cannot rely on mainstream media. You just cannot. And as Daniela Pierre says, all of this on the anniversary of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Shaking my head, she says. Absolutely. Thanks for joining Let It Be Known.